Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're having a, what do you call it, a hybrid meeting of the Public Health and Safety Committee of the Topeka City Council this morning. It is Wednesday, June 18th, 9:30. We're at the LEC. I'm Karen Hiller. I'm the chair of the committee. We have another committee member online. Can you introduce?
Councilman Brett Kell.
Thank you. And we have two members that are absent this week. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala is traveling and Councilman Banks is not well. We decided to go ahead with this meeting because we can tape it. A lot of the stuff about changing our culture of property maintenance is some background and review of numbers, and so Councilman Kell and I will be part of that, and then the others can watch. In terms of our item on dogs or animal control ordinances, with Councilman Kell's permission, maybe once we do the short field staff reports for changing our culture, we can move it up so we can go over that issue and let you all head on, unless you want to sit through the rest of our property maintenance things. But based on what I'm seeing out of our initial paperwork and conversation, I think if we can use this meeting to vet that, any conversation, any questions, it looked to me like it would be ready to move on with or without a formal committee vote so that we can get it taken care of for you. So that's what I've got in mind for the agenda today. With that, I will call the meeting to order and invite a motion to approve our minutes from May 25th.
Move to approve.
I'll second it. Obviously, the two of us will have a consensus about passing it, and we'll put that for the record, and they'll need to be checked with legal, but approved when we approve this month's minutes more formally. So got two supportive votes for the minutes. We'll move right on to changing our culture of property maintenance. We'll do some reports. I put these out. These arrived in people's water bills. I didn't know I hadn't seen one till I opened up my water bill, and I thought that was really cool. So this is in English on the front and Spanish on the back, and the title is "Why is Mowing and Maintaining Your Property Important?" Really nicely done. And so I thought we'd start out with some show and tell. Who do we give credit for creation of this?
Well, it was a combination of folks. So I came up with the original document. Yep. Here you go. I came up with the original document, and then I vetted it through several people. I think communications played a big role in it. My chain of command played a big role in it. Of course, I sent it to legal. Legal blessed it, and this is what we came up with.
And this gentleman, for viewers who don't know, is John Chardine, who's our supervisor of the property maintenance unit. Well, thanks for that. We're going to have a report in a minute about how many calls the support team over at OIC has gotten, but nicely done. With that, we have brief reports from Dan Garrett and Monique Glaudet, our marketing and education team leads. Monique?
So Dan's arriving first. You want to?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Is it okay if I sit on this side? The
Sure.
other side's a little crowded.
Sure.
So good morning, Dan Garrett, Director of Communications. So this month has been a focus on the Yard of the Month program. So we announced the kickoff and are starting to accept applications to encourage people to nominate themselves or neighbors to highlight people taking care of their yards. And so we'll have Monique give us kind of the stats of how that's going.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Monique Laudet. Thank you. Monique Laudet, Director of the Office of Inclusive Communities. So thanks to the partnership with Communications, we've had 28 submissions throughout the community. We are finalizing our packet today. We're very appreciative of those who sent in pictures, and then for Dan's team that were not to take pictures for those who weren't able to submit those. And so we're sending our information to our judges. We are very appreciative of our judges. We have 2 that represent nonprofit organizations and 1 from a local government agency. We will give them a 2-week span to be able to review those and to cast their votes. And so we're looking forward to receiving that information in the upcoming weeks and being able to announce our winner.
So tie it a little closer to a date for those of us who want to keep an eye out for it.
Sometime in mid-July.
Mid-July, okay. And meanwhile, will there be another one rolling?
People can continuously submit.
Okay,
Yes.
Yep, that's it.
community cleanups?
Sure. So for community cleanups, from direction from Dr. Perez, we are now doing it, we will kick it off on the second Friday of July. We are being the example, so city employees will go out and clean up a particular area. We will announce that area through communications. If our neighbors want to join us, they're more than welcome to. We will not hinder groups, community groups. If they want to go out and do cleanups, that's great. They can submit their pictures if they like to. If they need some technical support or any other type of minor support, they can contact me as well. But we are going to make it an in-house example, hoping that our neighbors will pick up and our other community partners and jump in and help out with some other community cleanups.
Okay. Will that be tied at all to Yard of the Month promotion or?
No,
Okay,
totally separate.
okay. All right. Calls?
Sure. So the Office of Inclusive Communities have received 31 calls currently since January in regards to CoCPM. 5 calls are related to recommendations for lawn mowing services. 1 call requested information on tree limb removal resources, and we were able to direct them to Shawnee County Waste. All Shawnee County Waste clients are able to put out limbs on a weekly basis. There are dimensions of how you have the size of the limbs, and so we were able to provide that information. And then the remaining 35 calls were identified as either property maintenance or police-related C-Click-Fix tickets that in which we created.
Awesome. Was there any particular surprises or?
No, just the routine calls.
Well, we really appreciate that. We've been trying to put the safety net together, and having somebody to call to either get your answer or get plugged in was really important to that. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
You're most welcome.
And more on community education, Dan?
So just the earned media with the Yard of the Month announcement, and then as we talked about earlier, thanks to John's team for coming up with the flyer to be sent out, and we had Brett and Eduardo on our team help create that and translate it. So that was the other outreach we did.
Okay, we had at one point had like 2 topics a month. Are
Yes.
those rolling at all?
We need to get back on track with that one.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I know we got stalled a little bit because we had retaliation safety net early and then decided we needed to revisit the retaliation safety net, so.
And it was
Continue working
for
on
this month, it was planned to be the Yard of the Month promotions and stuff, so.
Great. Well, just plan to keep us posted. We've got monthly meetings at this point, and that's really important, both what we're pushing out and whether we're getting the calls. And we know they're not all calling to you, but we appreciate that we've got a number at this point.
Absolutely.
Shaping up that system. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Brett, if it's okay with you, I don't know if you heard at the beginning, but I offered to the folks who are here from Animal Control for that issue that we could perhaps pop that ahead of our Changing Our Culture data review so that we could address that issue and let them go. Does that work for you?
That works.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and scoot forward to the amendments to dangerous dogs, and
Okay.
is that you?
Yep. So, Councilwoman, yeah, I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then I believe in letting the passionate subject matter experts come up and explain the why. I think that's always more effective. So,
Please introduce and.
I am Amanda Stanley, a city attorney. So, before you today, you have 2 different ordinances. These are ones that have been being talked about in some form or fashion for a while internally. You have received memos from both the court as well as animal control, as well as my office from my chief of prosecution explaining the changes. The purpose of the first one is to change the cruelty to animals ordinance, that's TMC 6.15.170, and I will let Animal Control Supervisor Bowers explain the why behind it, but this does change some definitions and the requirements for providing fresh water. You have a copy of it in your packet. The change is on page 1, and it changes it from on a regular basis to all times. It also makes some changes on page 4 about when the owner, if they're reasonably known about it, may petition the court for transfer of the animals. And this deals with performance bonds, which is very important and is causing significant challenges and cost and other things. So it can be a cost savings to the city. I'll let them explain it in more detail. And then the second ordinance is an amendment to the dangerous dog ordinance. This specifically is very much about making it where we don't have dogs that are at Helping Hands for years without any reimbursement for the city for those costs. Also, these dogs, I think they can tell you passionately, don't get a great quality of life when they're here on a dangerous dog hold because they don't get time in the yard. They don't get other things because they're on a dangerous dog hold. So we want to make sure that owners that have dogs in court are paying a responsible bond to cover their costs, as well as making it where the court has some flexibility moving forward. And with that, I'm going to call up Animal Control Supervisor Bowers to tell, and Chief of Prosecution Kelly Tressel, and they can tell you all about these two.
Power team here. Okay. Just lower the mic.
Yeah.
Yes, we've both worked very closely together on both of these amendments to the ordinances, and they're very important to prosecution in the side of moving cases forward. We have currently the dangerous dog ordinance releases the animal if the owner does not show up to the first appearance. What's happening is they show up to the first appearance, but then they don't show up after that. And then they go out on warrant, and next thing you know, we have a dog, here's an example, that's been there since November of 2023. And he's sitting there because the owner is out on warrant. And so this amendment would take care of that problem in that it would release the animal upon any failure to appear. And so then that would help both the animal, and she can speak to that, and also the costs that are associated with us paying for that boarding. So, if you want to speak.
So I will go off of the dog that's been there for a year and almost 7 months. That dog has not been outside. It is their protocol because of certain situations that unfortunately they can't spend a lot of time. They just do basic care. We've spent over $9,000 just on that case, and the dog's just seen a kennel. Animals like this, they do have really bad anxiety. They get very bored inside of their kennel. A lot of times that can come with medications, extra cost, and injury that we have to take the dog to the vet for. Because Helping Hands, while the dog's on hold, does not see the animal, we have to take it to our city vet because it is under our care and under hold. With our bill went up drastically due to Helping Hands finding out that for us to even talk to an owner, they can't legally hold on to the dog. So if we find a dog just tethered to a light pole, we don't have owner, but we sure don't want it to, just go back without us talking to somebody. We have to put that animal on a 3-day stray hold under us, so we can talk to owner. They can legally say, hey, you have to talk to animal control. So I feel like being able to have animals not be on hold and go through the process, and we have them come to court, prepay a bond that holds them accountable and doesn't have to set animal on hold for a year and 7 months, and then we have no end in sight on when we're able to find owner to hold them accountable.
I think the thing that the public worries about and that the animal control advocates worry about most is what happens to that dog then. People worry about euthanization versus adoption or care. So could you, if I'm not mistaken, Helping Hands is full right now because I've seen a fair amount of correspondence about that. So could you talk about what happens to the dogs and what what this will change for those dogs that you've been picking up and holding?
For dangerous dog cases, that's really up to Helping Hands. Once it's released to Helping Hands, they determine whether it's adoptable. And they're the specialists in that. And so they do make that decision. I would say at least 99% of cruelty cases, those dogs are adoptable. And so sitting in kennels, waiting and waiting and waiting for years. Most of them on average are many, many, many months until they're either voluntarily surrendered or the court orders the surrender. Those dogs are adoptable, and they're just sitting there. And Officer Bowers actually has adopted one of those.
Yes, I have.
Personally.
And,
so they could go for adoption and get out of the shelter. And we do account for about 25% of the capacity of Helping Hands. And so doing these changes and allowing us to get these dogs out of the kennels, that is going to help Helping Hands significantly. And I can tell you, I did receive a memo this morning from Margaret Price over at Helping Hands, and her memo, I'll summary, she's supportive of this 100%, for the welfare of the animals and for the capacity.
Thank you. I know people are watching and that people really do follow animal control issues, and so the idea of, okay, we're springing them to what would be a question. So thank you for that.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the dangerous dog or whatever, I don't know if after a while they can make an assessment, and while things are going through the court process, maybe, humans get bonds, so I don't know, maybe we have a bond system where the owner can, if the owners can take the dog back, if they've assessed it there, that after like a month that this is not a dangerous dog at that moment, we can maybe let the owners take the dogs back. And like I said, humans get bond and get out of jail, so I just can't believe that. I'm sitting here in my mind trying to think, what can we do for this dog? Just, I'm ready to volunteer just to go take it outside so it can see the sun and feel a breeze, because that to me is just crazy that a dog's been sitting inside for a year and 7 months, and because of the way we have our things structured, like it's baffling to me. And I have 3 myself, and I own a pit bull, and people sit there and say pit bulls are dangerous, and this is the most lovable dog I've ever had. And to sit there and just one situation and it gets labeled dangerous, to me is like, if there can be some type, maybe an assessment to sit there and allow it to back to its owner or to a foster system to get it out of the just being inside of a building all day 24/7.
So on the court side, and I'll let Officer Bowers talk about what happens on the back side of that, on the assessment. But on the court side, we do have a process. So if the dog is on hold and the owner wants it returned pending litigation of that charge, they can file a motion for early release, and they're heard at court. We base that on whether they can comply with the dangerous dog conditions in order to protect the public from that dog until it's adjudicated whether it is actually dangerous or not. And if they're able to comply with those conditions to keep people safe from any harm with that dog that might happen in the future, then they are released. And I'll tell you that the majority of them are released when those motions are filed. But those motions have to be filed by the owner in order for that to happen. But as far as the assessments go and what Helping Hands does, I'll let Officer Bowers speak.
First off, I wanted to say the ordinance states we may seize the animal, so it is to our discretion. A lot of these animals we have worked with multiple times. So the one that has been on hold, yes, has gotten out more than once because of human error. So we don't just take an animal where a gate was accidentally left open. We make sure that they can stay contained if they have a full fenced-in yard, if they're able to keep their animal, to where it won't happen again, we can keep them in the home. So unfortunately, these are cases where we've had no choice to seize the animal. I can't imagine how many kennels we would have filled if we seized everything, to be honest. But what Helping Hands does is if it is released, they go through behavior assessment for every animal. And sometimes they'll even do a retest. Keeping them in those kennels is just depleting their percentage of being able to be adopted out, to be able to be in foster homes. So a dangerous dog, just so everyone understands, can be from attacking a chicken to attacking a child. So we have a pretty wide range there, and they do put that in consideration.
I think finally, one important point of clarification is this change on page 4 is when an owner is not appearing to court. So the owner came the first time, they didn't request bond for the dog, they aren't getting the dog back, it's in Helping Hands, and then they just never show back up. And we have to have a legal process to seize your property, and a dog is a property interest. We can't, as the government, seize that without a valid ordinance allowing that. So these dogs, like they're talking about, it's one where the owner has vanished. They're not coming to court. They're not asking for their dog to get bond. So this would allow us to do what you're talking about and release the dog to Helping Hands with legal justification so they can get adopted out by a family that will love them.
Does that make sense, Councilman? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And this is dangerous dogs as well as neglected
So
dogs,
yes,
right?
there are two different operating, yes. I mean, as far as the failure to appear, it affects both. If they appear the first time, great. If they fail to appear anytime after that, then they have surrendered their animal. And they've been, and that's fair because when they come to court the first time, they have signed the date that they're supposed to return. And so they know, and they've chosen not to come. And so they're put on notice that their property is no longer going to be theirs if they don't come to court. And so that mechanism happens for both. There's also a bond situation with the cruelty that mirrors Kansas state law. And that's the 21 days you have to post the 30-day bond and renew that bond. And if you do not renew that bond, then the dog is surrendered. And that's the mechanism in the cruelty ordinance that, one, mirrors state law, but also allows us to get these dogs out and adoptable and move on without associating so much cost. The city is spending so much money on these dogs. In 2023, it was around $60,000. In 2024, it was over $60,000. It was closer to, I think, 70. And then 2025 alone, from January to just May, we are already at $60,000.
Okay. Well, and one of the things that we did, by the way, as a committee, it's important to get hold of stakeholders. And so Tara, our council assistant, did reach out to a couple of you to get the list of who the active animal advocates were today, and we shot a copy of your proposals with a cover letter out to them, inviting them to respond. And you mentioned Margaret Price from Helping Hands, whom of course you've been in touch with, but Tara, what, maybe half of the people, maybe, that we, at least for sure we connected with? Okay. It's important, again, at the committee level, ideally, to have let everybody know, to make sure if somebody has whether a concern, a support, tweaking of some words, that we hear it here so we can kind of work it and get it ready for council. But we've heard only support so far. Councilman, anything else?
No, I just, it's just unsettling that a dog's been like that for I honestly just want to go see the dog and give it some love, because that's just, it's baffling to me, and that a dog's been like that for 19 months, so.
Well, but there are probably, what did you say, 25% of the dogs that are in Helping Hands, so it's not just one, that's their extreme one, correct?
Yeah.
No.
She can speak to that. It's specifically on numbers. And that particular dog is our longest standing dog at the moment, but there are so many dogs that have been there for a year or more.
Yeah, so it's bigger than that, for sure. Do you have a number?
I mean, so I will say the court has really worked with us to try to, accommodate all of these. But I mean, looking back from even 2023, our average was around 6 months that an animal was on hold. I know looking through these, just for January, there was about 8 dogs that were on for over 30 days just in January. So that means that it carries on to the next month. So we've had many dogs on hold, and some even going to 6 months until we brought this up and we started working together to try to figure out a plan. So I mean, it's many. I know right now we have about 5 that have been on for about 2 months more. Going through the list, I have to go to Helping Hands and talk to them, but I mean, it's nonstop. I have all the paperwork here. It's just many. And unfortunately, we've been running into a lot of issues with a lot of past houses we've been to over and over and over again. And we're not seizing Fluffy because he needs a haircut. These are dogs that have been in some situations for a while. We've tried to help, we've tried to educate. We drop kennels off at times if their dogs are getting out. There's things like that. We really work with Helping Hands to try to just help and not just give out citations and take dogs. That's not what we're doing. So for it to be such a high number, it is pretty concerning in that sense. And so being able to cut that down, like I said, it's a pretty big number since 2023, especially, that we've had on hold for longer than a month.
Thank you for that. So the kind of to wrap around summary of what you're wanting to take forward is some legal steps in order to get these dogs moving instead of just having them trapped when an owner's not responding. Then we also had one single piece coming through, which was just an adjustment in the language about water. And so saying that it was available instead of just on a regular basis, that it was available at all times. You felt that would kind of close a gap if they're depend on a circumstance, correct?
Yes, from a prosecution lost my words. From the prosecution's point of view on being able to actually get to beyond a reasonable doubt standard for water, it is impossible to have it that vague. Just regular basis, what does that mean? And really the only time we can prosecute those cases that dogs don't have water, and we know factually they don't have water, but we can't prove it unless there is no dog dish at all, there's gross water in the dog dish, or so much dirt in the dog dish that clearly it has not had water. Outside of that, they make excuses. They say, we just watered it. I mean, she can tell you all the stories that she hears. But unless there is 100% proof that there has been no water at all, we cannot prosecute those cases. So there are a lot of bad owners that are not watering their dog, especially in the heat, and we can't prove it. And so adequate water at all times would solve that and allow the discretion for ACO to decide, is this a good owner or a bad owner?
Just wanted to make sure we touched on that before we moved on. Councilman, we're not going to be, the two of us can have consensus to move this forward, but one of the beauties of bringing these to committee is just to help frame up how best to present it at the council and public level. Any suggestions? And I'm just offering that opportunity. For instance, her data, is that important, or just sending out the ordinances themselves with the cover letters?
I think the data is a good point to have, and I think Animal Control's been doing a great job. I sat through the Citizens Academy for the police department and heard them talk, and I think we have a great animal control. The biggest thing is the safety aspect, but also the care and love of the animals that they are having to tend to.
Okay, well, without further ado, are you comfortable? I mean, for you and me, it's just consensus that we think it's ready to go. You
Yes.
comfortable moving it forward? All right. You have our blessing.
Thank you.
Such as we can give it. Purposefully went ahead with this meeting today, even with our 2 absences, so that our 2 other committee members could view it as soon as they can at their convenience, so that at least 4 of us would be prepped before you get to the big time.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the work that you're doing. Thank you, City Attorney, for bringing it forward. With that, we will get back to the changing our culture, property maintenance, enforcement, and action, and Nicole Stovall, who is our staff lead for this movement, is going to handle walking us through our action plan and teams for 2025, the performance report that she inherited the start of when she first joined us in October. Is that right?
It's almost been a year.
Almost been a year. It had
I
been
think
started, and so she's been scrambling around to not only get this data pulled with what's really our first checklist of what that data would be, but for those who don't know, has been our lead, or the unit's lead in the transition from the MyGov software to the Tyler software. So she's been gathering and inventing kind of 24/7 for some time, and we really appreciate that. So what we want to do is let her, I may pitch in on some of it, but she and I have worked together on what the action plan is, pulled out of where we are, what's been going on. We're at the 3-year checkpoint in a 5-year plan, and so reviewing where we are and what teams we have and making sure everybody knows who they are and what we're doing this year is just now been done, and she's going to share that. And then she's got a lot of data to run through. Our look at that data will include responding and reacting to what she's able to share with us, but also being on point, actually with all 3 items on, is there something missing? Or is there something that's not clear? And then last on her list is outcomes measures. And so what are those from our basic overall goals for the initiative, and are we yet reporting on those? So with that, Nicole Stovall.
So for our 2025 action plan, we originally kind of wanted to start with site updates. So making sure that all of our material is the same, no matter where you're going. There were some updates that we have sent to our programmers and to IT for the Changing Our Culture of Property Maintenance webpage. I know as a whole, the city is moving to a whole new site, so it's kind of been delayed a little bit just because they're redoing literally everything.
Let me stop you for just a second. This isn't fancy, but for those who are watching, I don't know that we're doing screen share. So we do have, Nicole's working off a list that is available if people want copies.
So we've got that, as well as syncing just any sort of information that's going out into any other pages. With that also, Dan has contributed to our.
We are going to have it.
So it's going to be the 2025 action plan.
It's about the 5th page in the whole packet. It's up in the front. Yep. Keep going. One more. It's a 2-page document. Whoa. 3-page document. There you go. Thank you.
We've also got our media that Dan has been working on when it comes to determining what sort of outreach to be using, whether that be TV, radio, social media, digital prints, like what we did with the water. And so developing that promotional plan, that's something that we've already talked about previously, but just making sure that we're blasting those sort of promotional things out of those different outreach media items. Dan has been the front runner for that. We've also, like you mentioned, our software transitioning from MyGov, which was our old system, as well as CityWorks, which is where all of our see-click-fix come from. We are taking both of those and merging those into Tyler. So all of our data, everything that we have as far as cases, how things are handled, everything is being created into the Tyler system, which a major part of the Changing Our Culture initiative was making sure that we weren't only just developing property maintenance the best that we could, but we were also making sure that we were taking these other departments and speaking to each other to say, hey, how can we help each other? Because it's not just a one department fix. Helping the city as a whole has got to be a holistic approach. So that involves fire, it involves permits, it involves zoning. And so with this transition, we're going to be able to kind of bridge some of those gaps because we're all going to be on one system finally, which hasn't happened, I don't know, before, ever. So it's very exciting. So we've got a lot of things in there when it comes to revising all of our letters, when it comes to making sure that all of our workflows not only involve our department, but flagging in the system. We've had, now it'll be weekly meetings with some of these other department heads to say, hey, how can we flag each other in this system to notify you of issues that you might now need to be concerned about? If we've got a violation that requires a permit, how can we notify you? And so that software transition has been a huge undertaking. It's involved, obviously, a lot of people are listed in there. It also involves our data inventories. We've got a vacant registry list that we have been diligently creating with GIS. So our mapping system and that software, trying to identify all of the properties here in Topeka that may be vacant. So that way then we can go and check those out, because it seems historically within our data, they have been not just vacant, but problem properties. So that was a large undertaking as well with changing our culture, is just identifying properties that are continuously having issues. Next, we've got our community engagement volunteer opportunities. We heard a little bit from Monique, and they have really taken on that whole, as far as like the neighborhood self-help, that community engagement portion. And so we had those two specifically set for 2025 as goals of having volunteer opportunities, as well as just having the city involved with the community. We've got our promotional education material, a new IPMC, so the 2024 is being under review right now. So with that become some educational distribution materials, whether that be, I think we've got some new vegetation that's come up. We also had gone forward because we saw the need for pest control before we actually adopted the 2024. We went ahead and did the pest control portion. So we've tried to make sure that we're revising a lot of our program and resources lists, whether that be with community engagement or housing. We've got renter protection, so that kind of retaliation portion there with housing. We've also talked with planning and development to try to get a hold of their department to see how we can start to not only develop tip sheets for larger developers, which is kind of what they do already, but the small developers as well. And we've got different other materials that we've translated into Spanish to try to be more inclusive and holistic in that. With our new IPMC, we've had some new ordinance creations as well, as far as just conversations. So we have not only our code, but abatement policies. We've got reviewing the success of LLCs and repeat offenders listed in here, our fines and fees. So there are a lot of different departments. Amanda has been a huge asset as far as taking a look. A lot of these do end up falling into legal, as far as our ordinance creation and just making sure that we are not only fair, but we are not allowing people to continue to take advantage of a system. We have taken a look at PMU, our code administration, so making sure that we're training and certifying within a certain period of time, making sure that we are working with fire on a routine basis, cross-training kind of between the two of us. We've set already objective response times for hazardous conditions. John had taken care of that, taking a look at all of our SOPs on a regular basis to make sure that we are as most up to date as possible. With that, obviously, then any sort of updates, we've got to do some department training. So making sure that we are doing customer service training. John has taken a hold of that, onboarding. As far as any of the materials with Tyler will be upcoming through me. Monique and I think this is it still says housing community, it's housing community navigator. Right. And so they had refreshed that position. It's now with community engagement. And so making sure that they are cross-training that position with all of these other departments, making sure that they are kind of a liaison for people in the community between PMU or between legal, between making sure that they have what they need as far as from their landlords or educational pieces. So I know we've spoken to that a little bit. We'll get to our performance measures here. We have challenged Carrie with housing to maybe look at some new partners for LMI, challenge LMI owners, seeing how we can best help.
LMI
Lower middle income.
It's close.
I think, right?
Low and moderate
Low
income.
moderate income, that's what it is. I have too many things in my.
Just checking.
Low
You've
moderate
been
income.
great, but
Thank you. Put me right on the spot. Exploring new partners, but then also with the vacant property activation, not only did we want to identify vacant properties, but we wanted to say, okay, how can we develop these into more creative ways of maybe using that space or making sure that these aren't just houses that are sitting. Maybe if these are properties that have been sitting for years or an owner has passed away, what can we do? Can we reach out to next of kin, not just saying and identifying it, but seeing how we can move it along. So that's really all of our goals, which are quite a lot for this next portion or next phase of the Changing Our Culture. The beginning of that too also had a team directory showing just kind of who those people were, because I know that there were a lot of names that were mentioned in there. And so that is kind of just a brief overview, I think.
let's stop there and see if Councilman Kell has any questions or comments. That's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
We tasked him with reading it beforehand, so he already had his questions, but anyway. Any questions or comments on that?
Not right now, thank you.
Okay. One of the things that's a key in that is emerging now is that Nicole went through those sort of in the order that we started on them, and vacant properties was a piece that was tremendously important. But as we ended up with doing the LLCs first, and then the safety nets and retaliation and working on shared databases and so on, that kept getting kind of pushed down the line. And so we have met with the names that are on there, Director Friedman, Rhiannon Friedman at Planning and Development, Quinn Cole, who is a redevelopment, is a major part of what she's doing in the land bank. And so have stepped it up in terms of them not just being our name team, but because they're all over in planning development and are working with a board with the land bank and so on to really kind of similar to partnering with the fire department on some things, having them serve in the lead position on that, as a partner with us rather than a committee of ours, if you will. So.
And it's not necessarily stuff that we haven't even started yet. A lot of the things that are listed on here are things that had already been either in the works and we're continuing to complete that, or we've already started those conversations or already started that work. So this was really just kind of a summary of what will be accomplished or our goals to be accomplished for this next kind of phase.
Well, and thank you for your work on that. And what was as important as clarifying where we are and what we're working on this year, 2025, was to get that list clear so that all of us were on the same page if we wanted to pull together a meeting or check and see who was involved in X or Y, that we really knew who those teams were. We've been really fortunate to have some steady people such as John and Alan and City Attorney Stanley throughout the whole thing, but actually a fair amount of stability, and that's been helpful. But staff has changed, and we've brought new faces in as well. And so, again, if anybody looks at those lists and has a question or just realizes we've left somebody out, we want it to be complete and accurate, and it's in Google, so we can do that. Right? Okay, if there are no questions at this point, we can go back, Councilman, or actually guests as well. If you've got any comments, you've been involved in this emerging all this time. We'll go ahead and move on and let Nicole go through our first big full share of some performance data. Again, with this, it all ties to the outcomes that we were here for in the first place. And let me just say in short, that was we'll go through them at the end, but to reduce the number of inspections that even were needed, to have people helping themselves and each other so that our properties and our community are safe, affordable, and look great. And it doesn't involve the city at all. So these measures are to see how we're doing. You may want to go ahead and start, when you do that, to talk about the baseline numbers that we've struggled with, and then go from there.
Yeah, I had been working on this quite a bit. MyGov is an interesting system. I had sent all of this last week and then continued to take a look at it and work it just a little bit further. So I did just send Dan to the updated versions, whether or not he'll be able to pull those up. But there wasn't too many changes as far as from our questions. We had 20 of those that we kind of wanted to answer as far as data goes. And within that, then kind of pull out some numbers and some trends as what was going on.
Dan, are you running for our document?
I am.
I know,
Okay.
I didn't, I was just thinking, I was like, oh, he's got the old one. I probably should share the new one with him.
Oh. That's right. We got a fresh copy last night. Right? Okay.
So I'll start that. So I had 20 different questions. They're split up into sets of 5, which goes to each of our 4 challenges, which is kind of how we were measuring the success of the entire initiative. So originally we took a look at the number of PMU inspections, which included the initial re-inspections as well as our total per year for all case types. Within the MyGov system, I did have to give this disclaimer that however many times that button resulted had been pressed in that system for the initial and re-inspections is how many times it was counted in that system.
Let's go ahead and get that up, because now that's not the report.
So there should be 2 that and all.
This is a lot of numbers. I think if they're at least
Yeah.
up on the screen, it will help.
Oh, you're okay.
So it's not this one?
There should be,
It said that was just a 2-page document, which means that your big report is something else, is a different document.
This is the one we want?
I'll send it to you.
That's the categories, but it's not the one with the numbers.
Okay. Stand by.
So you can see it.
Yeah, I thought maybe I was. I sent it to you in a new one. So you should get it.
Performance data is what it, is that?
So, it's up at the top. It says 1 through 12, or 20, and then it's the other one. Yep, that one. Perfect.
And while we're waiting to get that finally up, this is important both to look at the data so far, but because we're getting ready to go into looking at changes to the IPMC, both in terms of reviewing and possibly changing the standards and issues that we're looking at, or how we balance the inspections in those categories, as well as what our systems are for fines and fees and process. And so getting caught up now on kind of how it's looking with what we've been doing for the last couple of years was important.
So we, for the most part, if the data was in there, I pulled it from 2021 to 2024. And so with this very first question, we could see that there were definitely a higher number of courtesy inspections, which was great. Then it wasn't necessarily going in and just immediately starting a case and having a violation and going through that process. We gave them more of a courtesy inspection. We also looked at initial and re-inspections, which were significantly higher, that we were doing just initial inspections and not having to go back out there as much for re-inspection. Again, this number was a little bit higher than the actual case count. It just goes into human error if there were times where those numbers, as far as that button in the system was pressed and then gone back and undone and then pressed again. But we could see kind of that there was that trend as far as not doing as much of the re-inspections, but being able to complete those violation and getting those fixed then with just an initial inspection. For the second one, we had our number of internal and external violations and the total number per year. So we had a higher number of external, a little bit lower number of internal, a little higher of the external and internal, and then quite a few blanks. Only our housing violation case types had been logging this violation, so it accounts for only a portion of our cases. So that was something to consider when we are moving into Tyler, is being able to answer that question for all of our cases, not just for housing violation. Because we know weed cases are external, or that tree, limbs, those new type of vegetation cases are going to be external, but in the old system, those weren't accounted for. It's also come to our attention then that we have been training our people to say, hey, you got to answer that question in the system. It's not something that you should skip. So that was already an email then after pulling these numbers, because it is a rough, job out in the field. They're trying to get through some of those, but just telling them why that was important came to our attention as far as with how many blanks that we were receiving just within that case type.
And if I can insert just a little bit here, we did our first round of some background stuff at last month's meeting, and so the overall performance goals are in the packet for, if somebody wants to go find them, they're on the Changing Our Culture of Property Maintenance page, and or they can pull them out of last month's meeting packet. But these numbers that, just as an example that Nicole's talking about, are important because we wanted to do more protection of renters. Well, you got to get more interior inspections to do that. So we set up a partnership with police and with fire and code to do joint inspections. We had some hiccups along the way of getting as complete as we wanted, but and now we're watching for responses, for instance, from Monique as to whether people called that number, because that's the number that was on the little cards that got left and so on. So just as an example of trying to pull together all the pieces and departments of this partnership and well-oiled machine. And then that gives us a basis for driving some other goals as well. If our interior inspections, for instance, are still low, we generally will prioritize those It doesn't split as far as being a rental property versus homeowner occupied, but for the most part, there's been a tradition to leave homeowners alone unless there's an issue. And either way, being invited in, all those details, but these are the numbers that kind of pull together where we're at, that can help us better, if needed, talk about where we're going. Just wanna
Yeah,
put some
and that was-
framework out there for you.
Yeah, the goal was to definitely have, more of those interior inspections than just taking a look at our numbers. Our third question was how many cases per year per case type and how many addresses for all of those case types. So that was interesting. We have each of these split up into all of our different case types that you can see. Then it's got our total cases listed at the end. And the actual total number of addresses that those were involved with. And so you could see then that,
Dan, if you could scroll.
there it is. You can see that our total cases definitely went up. We, even just weeds had a significantly higher number from several years ago, but we can also see that the total addresses has also gone up. So it means that it's been more people, not necessarily just going and hitting one house over and over and over again, or, picking on just one person necessarily. There has been more addresses that were even affected, and this was the total number. So there are no duplicates in that. Anything that was a duplicate was taken out. So that is how many out of those total cases, how many addresses were involved.
Well, you might want to, this might be a good time to point out, so for instance, things like weed cases, since we started out talking about mowing, we wanted to see those go down, not up. Yet we only recently, it still bumps, right, John, but have totally filled the slate of inspectors. And so we haven't yet, we don't want to know what data we're missing, but just as an example, aren't yet, I don't think, maybe for weeds we are doing 100% of all, drive-by of all the residences in an entire district, so that we know we're dealing with 100% instead of 20% of any particular territory that somebody's covering. We also know that we had COVID in the early years of this count, when people couldn't go out at all, couldn't come to work at all, couldn't be in a room together at all. And so your sense, correct me if I'm wrong, is that from you, John and Nicole, that the 2024 is probably the first baseline year we should use for
I agree
Probably
with some
would
of
be able to
some of the
answer it better.
figures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there might be questions along the way. We're trying to figure out when we're at full saturation numbers. Thanks.
Yeah. Our fourth question was the percentage of violations from LLCs or repeat offenders. I know that has been the talk for quite some time when it comes to how many of these people are LLCs. So I had originally kind of broken this down into a 30-70 when I had sent out this originally. I went back and kind of just reconfigured and restructured what that looked like to maybe answer that a little bit easier. So in 2024, when I ran that report, it gave me 6,638 total lines. Out of those cases, 1,954 of those were from owners that just had one case. Out of those cases, 227 of them were specifically LLCs. Then further on, 897 of that total number of cases were from owners that had multiple addresses with just one case for each one of those addresses. So they had a weeds violation at 111. They had a housing case at 112, but they had multiple addresses and just one case on each one of those. 3,787 cases were from owners that had two or more violations for the same address. Oh, and I had skipped, I guess, LLCs from that 800 number. There were out of that, half of those, 435, were from LLCs. And then that last line, the 3,787 cases were from owners that had 2 or more violations for the same address, and 858 of those were from LLCs specifically.
Just to clarify on that, from you at PMU or maybe legal, what we know, I think, is that there's an inclination to assume that an LLC is a big corporation, but it might be the small guys who've chosen to, individuals or small holders who've chosen the LLC as a way to hold their properties, correct?
Correct. Yep, that was anybody that had an LLC associated with their name. So not necessarily ones that had over 15
owners.
properties or anything like that. But
you.
they were still owners that had 2 or more violations for the same address. So we were able to kind of split that out between LLCs as well as just owners specifically that included LLCs. So that was more so an inclusive percentage, and then split that out into how many of those were specifically LLCs then in that. We also had question 5, which was how many individuals are utilizing the appeal form in the notice and what were the outcomes. Within these appeals, the only cases that are included in these are weeds, sanitation, and vehicle. And those violations, they can be an appeal to the appeals are to the violation, as well as they have an opportunity to appeal the bill. So that makes up the total amount of appeals. 2 of those were the abatement costs and the penalties were affirmed. 2 of those cases were actually just closed. 2 were the appeal forms were submitted, but they failed to appear. We had, one where the owner canceled it. We had volunteer compliance. Those were waived totally, though we had 52 appeals within that process that they were able to utilize, not only for the violation, but as well, again, for the bill.
And these are, just to clarify, where people are advised in their notice that within 10 days they can appeal it.
Yes.
And so it's only 53 out of 6,000 some? So and this is also a quasi judicial hearing. It's actually one of the judges that does the hearings, right? At this point.
That is correct at this point. It is set in code that the city attorney hires the administrative hearing officer. At this point, it makes sense for it to be one of our municipal court judges, a cost savings consolidation.
Sure. Just as we're moving forward, just to kind of give it a little bit of where it is, okay?
It does not have to be a licensed municipal court judge, but that is best practice.
Thank you.
Our next question was how many vacant properties are cited per year for other case types? Because through this process, we have seen that vacant properties aren't just sitting vacant. They are dealing with weeds. They have sanitation issues. So you could take a look out of those 4 years, just specifically with the last year, we had 201 vacant properties that we had registered. And out of that 201, there were 213 additional cases that came from those 201 properties. So we had just as many other cases on those properties as we had that were actually registered. So it kind of shows then that we aren't necessarily, maybe mothballing. That's something we've talked about, our vacant properties, is setting those to where someone is reliably coming and cutting grass or closing up the structure to where it's safe and secure. That was something that we wanted to be able to make sure that we were educating the public and the community to say, okay, these properties can't just sit unattended. They may not have anybody that's actually living in them, but there still does need to be some sort of standard of care for these properties to make sure they're not deteriorating and or causing other, health and safety issues for the community then. So we then further into our vacant properties, how many of those were registered, complied, and not complied. So we had 201 just this last year. 67 of those owners actually confirmed vacancy. 123 of them did not, and then we had 11 blanks within our system. So where it was gone through to where we didn't have necessarily anything that had been marked in there. That was something that we just know at this point that there are quite a few more vacant properties than 201 in the city of Topeka. And so that has challenged us then, just within the last several months, to make sure that we have partnered again with Travis with our mapping system. Alan had put together a group that was for vacant structures to take a look. So we have significantly jumped that number, around 12 to 1,500 actual vacant properties potentially. So this next year will definitely be more of a baseline for us moving forward. That was kind of the goal, but that's kind of where we had sat just this last year.
Just to double check, when this report says vacant properties, is that only ones with structures on them, or does it include vacant parcels?
So originally it was vacant structures as well as vacant lots.
Okay.
And so moving forward, though, we really wanted to identify first vacant structures. Because vacant lots are an issue, but vacant structures, we thought we could at least take a look at that first. So that's where that 12 to 1,500 number came from with our kind of more digging, was that those were properties that potentially are vacant here in the city of Topeka that have an actual structure on them. We wanted to see how many of those vacant properties had been transferred to the tax sale per year. And so with that, we've listed how many of those vacant properties we had registered in our system, how many were actually sent to the tax sale, how many overall. There is a bit where some were redeemed prior to the tax sale, within the years 21 and 22. But we did have 4, 15, 13, and 9 that were actually sold at the tax sale from properties that we had identified. Moving along, we've got our fire. How many fires did we have each year that were from accidental, incendiary, and then undetermined? Alan was able to take a look and give us those numbers for the first 3 as well as the total. And then we were able to cross-reference with how many of those we had registered with the number then that was within his number. So our actual registered vacant structures that had fires on them were 4, 2, 3, and 2. But that was only out of, 5, 4, 2, and 200. And so
1,200.
well, this isn't actually taking into account any of the ones that we had identified. This was only the ones that we had registered.
Okay.
So that number is a little bit lower than what I think maybe we would expect if we had ran that identified number of the 12 to 1,500 of those potential ones. Also, with fire, we had been doing inspections in multi-housing properties. So how many of those are we doing for fire safety violations per year? Our data is a little bit different than how fire does theirs. So we were able to kind of merge the two. So this is what it looked like from their MOU spreadsheet. The total known apartment complexes here in the city was 111. They do interior as well as exterior exits for building inspections, and then count the total number of their building inspections. We more so do total complexes, and so we were able to see that for total buildings that we had that fire had inspected was 405, and the total complexes out of that 111 was 88 that fire had been able to complete. The total buildings that PMU inspected was 138, and then we inspected 32 of those 111. So that gave us a good baseline. I know when we originally had this last year, we had a staff member that was solely going out and doing these, and every single inspection that he was on, fire was also present. So we were doing that jointly. Now, moving into 2025, we no longer have the staff to do that. But fire has been able to have that partnership with us to be able to go out and continue not only theirs, but then also posting notices for PMU while they are there, to be able to make sure that people know, hey, you can call for interior inspections, here's the number, here's how you would get a hold of us. So that's why we're gonna kind of continue doing that. And I think this last time we also kind of went over as far as their system, it's not all year round, where like PMU goes out all year round and does all of those. They have a specific quarter that they actually do any of those multi-housing like apartments. We had, next was how many abatements per year were paid and other fines paid. So we had our total billed as well as total paid, and this was just with PMU. So this was just within our system. This wasn't any of like the collections, which was the numbers then down below on number 12 of how many abatement costs were sent and actually retrieved from collections per year. So we have total billed and total paid for PMU, and then underneath is how much we actually sent, the amount that was paid to collections, still active to collect. So there is a running balance that is still being paid into, some of which had gotten canceled for various reasons, an owner death, or that it was a canceled debt. And then some of those are on hold, which means that that collection agency was doing some sort of like investigative type of work between them, or setting up some sort of agreement. So those were kind of more so on hold rather than being tracked actively in the system. We also had how much abatement fine costs were waived per year and for what case type. That only included for 23 weeds and sanitation. So the total for that was around 22,000. This last year, it included weeds, sanitation, and one unsafe structure case. And so typically we would be running around that 20,000 per waived. But with that unsafe structure, it did jump up to the 42,000 that we see there. And how many cases go to court per year and for what case types. This number is what PMU actually sends to court each year for Kelly to evaluate during that intake process. They actually then decide when to file that based on priority, so the importance level, the numbers of filings that are allowed each week. So these are just how many that we actually send over for court to actually start their intake process. It doesn't necessarily mean that once we have sent that it immediately starts in the court. That is more of a holding tank. So we have been pretty consistent with how many of those we've sent over, and it's only been our housing condemnation notices, or housing condemnation cases and housing violation cases. John, I think, probably could speak to a little bit more, though, that we are looking at sending those additional types of cases for
Repeat violators.
So
if we open up code cases for repeat violators or chronic violators, we'll send those immediately to court to be evaluated by Kelly's team. If she decides that they qualify, then they qualify, and she can actually bring that in front of the judge while the case is active.
Well, and something that we're looking at overall, again, this data is a little discouraging about collections, right, and so on. And so as we move forward looking at the new IPMC, we wanted to follow fines and fees. We started getting the data and went, oh, and then talking about the process that it took to when you're filing it as a criminal complaint. So
Right.
Part of what's on deck, as I understand it right now, is, well, maybe we should go to more of an administrative fine and fees procedure, relook at what type of system we're using for assessing those fines and fees in the first place, and what change that makes in a collection process. again, with in mind all along that our idea was so that we would minimize how many inspections we did overall, even having run up the expense and then having to go through the collection process. And so I'm not current, but I know people are thinking about it, so appreciate that. And again, this data gives us the ahas about what's actually happening in some cases, the type of case or the money and collections and processes that we have. Okay?
Moving forward, we wanted to know how many does the court actually find owners guilty of violations per year? So Kelly was able to give me those. She did let me know that there was an extremely high value originally starting out in 2021, because when she got there was quite a bit of backlog of cases in that intake process that hadn't been dealt with before she actually arrived in the position. So that's why you see that huge influx of, the 800 number originally, and then it's significantly lower than for the rest of those 3 years. Quite a few of those do get dismissed for various reasons, but they were able to have 5, 4, 17, and now 46 actual convictions.
Okay.
Our next one of the 16, question 16, was the average number and range of days between cases when it start date and then actual volunteer compliance per year. So this one is quite a bit of data. That very first one, though, is our range. So that is taking all of those cases and saying how many days from start to finish did it actually take, and that was the range that we started with. So some of those numbers are quite large. Some of those numbers might be quite large because those cases were kind of lost in the system, or they were, especially with our unsafe structures, it takes quite a bit of time for those cases that they can kind of be continuing in the hearing process. And so underneath, to give a little bit more of an accurate view, was the average number of days that it takes to actually close in those cases. So for graffiti, we've able to take that down a little bit from 2021. Weeds is significantly lower than, as far as number of days, from originally 22 to 16. Sanitation, we've stayed around the same. Vehicle is around the same. Our housing violation notices has gone down quite a bit, as well as the condemnation and our unsafe structures. But this is also too dependent a little bit on how much staff we have at the time, as well as far as how many cases get opened and how soon, especially if we're having to transition those back and forth between inspectors.
Well, and something that, again, and gosh, I hope if Councilman Kell has had anything, since I can't see him, that he lets you know, right, Dan?
I'm sorry.
If Councilman Kell has had questions or comments along the way, you can let me know, is that right?
I can only see this screen too.
Oh,
so
okay.
If he speaks up,
Oh,
tell him
okay.
to speak up.
Okay. Councilman Kell, speak up. What I'm thinking here is that it would further be instructive to us to know how many, of these, how many contacts with inspectors. If somebody's gotten a 90-day extension or even a 1-year extension to get something done, that matters in terms of our staff time and the wear and tear on the property owner as well, truthfully, depending on what it is.
Well, and I think now we have become a little bit more clear as far as how much an extension that we are willing to give for different case types. And so maybe, John, I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit more as far as how much time is actually given.
So each case is evaluated case by case basis, right? Depending upon the property owner, resources, capacity to make the repairs. The direction that I give is that you are not allowed to extend the case any further than the original due process time. So when it comes to sanitation, it's 14 days. You can give them 2 weeks extension. Anything after that needs to be approved by a supervisor. And so my supervisors are directed to audit at least 30% of the cases that come in front of admin staff to send it in the mail. So I would like to have 100% audited, right? But that's not realistic, because my field supervisors work. They're on the road, they're out there evaluating, they're at the high priority abatements, controls the complaints, right? So what we have in place now seems to be working a lot better than what we had in the past. And it's really about communication, evaluations, and changing our tactics, or how we move forward, and providing education to the property owners and occupants. So the more time that we spend with these property owners and occupants, the less complaints that we receive, the more compliance that we gain, because they have to understand why we do what we do. And also, I think it benefits that when we tell you we're going to do something, we do it. And in the past, that may have not happened, but we spend a large amount of time field training our inspectors, teaching them what their role is with the city, and how to communicate with the property owners and occupants. So we've been getting great success with that.
Thank you for that. It helps to put a face on the numbers. We want numbers, right? But how it's processing, and we'll probably get into more of that in our next couple of meetings as we talk about the IPMC,
Sure.
staying the same or changing. But thank you for that.
Moving along, we've got our origin of complaint, which was internal versus external per year. Those kind of probably should have been switched. So we had originally 5,395 blanks within our system. So we realized, we are not marking whether or not if this is a complaint or not. And then the next year, then we only had 84. So they did a much better job of going into the system and taking a look and saying, yes, this is a complaint. No, this is not a complaint, and being able to log that. So about 4,932 were actually not a complaint. 3,802 were a complaint out of those total 8,818 cases. So we could see just for 2024, then up above, external were 1,376. Internal, which was city initiated, then was 650. A large portion then started to come in from our C-Click Fix, which was 1,721. And then only 55 of those were marked as yes, but they weren't actually marked as to whether or not they were external, internal, or the C-Click Fix. So that was, you could definitely see that we were taking note of those complaints and logging those. And then also making sure that we were listening to the public when they were able to go in and take a look and log those complaints in that system as well.
Again, this is an educational piece, not for the public, but for my staff. So my field supervisors, the reason for the drop, for the blank, huge drop, is because they go in and they audit those cases, and they bring bring the employee in and say, hey, you missed this. Matter of fact, going back, I see that you missed this a lot. So this is when we educate them, we provide the background on why this is important, because we do have somebody pulling the reports. We do have people asking questions. So every box that is there needs to be filled in one way or another, right? Either yes, no, interior, exterior. And then we answer all the questions. Staff has questions. These are smart people. So when they come and they say, hey, why do we do this? We provide the answers. I think in the past it may have been ignored, right? It may have been one of those, we do this every time, and that's all you need to know. So now we provide them answers and backgrounds and why we do what we do.
That's good.
We were also to take a look at, for that next question with housing, was how much money was applied for versus how much was awarded per year. So their program runs a little bit differently than a yearly program. It's on a 3-year renewal. So they had $750,000 that was grant money. And the entire $750,000 that was in that grant funded program actually was allocated. So they were able to help 37 households total within that first 3 years. This is a report as far as halfway through for the next number. They also did receive an additional $200,000 from the general funds that were received. So they've only had a portion of that actually allocated out, but they're only, halfway or so, a little more than halfway through. And that was a conservative number. They have helped so far 14 of those households then to be able to fix anything from, I think it was any of the household repairs. So this was the grant money for, help me,
Well, the big grants from the
I know it's
Federal Home Loan
painting
Bank.
and the federal loan, or the
Federal Home Loan Bank.
Federal Home Loan Bank, that's what, yes. So that's where that money was received. So yeah, they're about halfway through. I know Carrie will be able to give at the end of that 2026. I think that they were saying that they're projected to probably use all of that. I think at one point
And this
Carrie-
was part of the home buyer safety net,
Yes.
and this is the housing division that's under planning and development. Just to quick forward this, and the 200,000 we've talked about in this committee before, but that was added from general fund because the money from the Federal Home Loan Bank, they choose where it can be spent, and so it's only in certain parts of town. And we added a little money. It may be just a one-time thing, but to make sure that we could provide some assistance. There was the housing staff gave us an estimate of what they could probably use in low and moderate income neighborhoods that were not in the FHLB footprint, to make sure we could address. So that's why that came in.
Our next question then was how many abatements were completed per year for sanitation and weeds. We can see the number of abatements as well as the total for any of those two case types. So we do have a bit higher number than we have previously, but I don't know if you could speak to as far as maybe why we have any of those higher numbers
Sure.
for our number of abatements.
We have more personnel. So we have more personnel, more inspections. We're always looking for voluntary compliance, but when that doesn't happen, we do what we say we're going to do. And we follow through with it.
Okay. And that one last question, Nicole, do you know the answer to that one?
I don't. We haven't actually had a, as far as another survey from what it was previously. So I think that would be one of our next goals, is to try to see how we could evaluate that as far as what the public kind of sees.
What that came from, I think, is that the city would periodically, I don't know that it was absolutely every year, put a survey in the water bills.
Yeah.
And just ask the public feedback on various things about city performance. And so just need to get the city manager or assistant city manager and see, unless, again, if anybody knows that one's in the works. Okay.
I would like to add that with the addition of the new software we have coming aboard, that I have seen previews, and I'm extremely excited about the public-facing information that we can provide on real time. Instead of tasking staff with constantly pulling figures from past inspections, this can be provided on a regular basis. And it's going to have graphs, and it's going to be very engaging. The appearance should be very attractive, so that is an extra bonus for us.
So we thank you and Nicole for that, and Alan for what your input. I mean, you guys have been on the front lines of that, so trying to make sure.
You guys already had it originally, too.
Okay, we are maybe a minute from our closing time. We're doing really well. Councilman Kell, do you have any questions about or comments on the performance measures data so far?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, why don't you give us an overview here of the master challenge stuff, and we will wrap up.
Do you want me to just do?
You know, I'm not sure, given that we're at our closing time, just a refresher maybe on the, on just the headings, and encourage everybody to have a look at those. Because you and I have looked over them, we're kind of collecting on some of them, but not on all of them.
So we had the 4 different challenges, and so if you go back to that performance measure data, each one of those was labeled C1, C2, C3, or C4. So that actually lines up then with each one of those 1, 2, 3, and 4 of those challenges. So that was to reduce the current substandard structures by 50% in 5 years, reduce deterioration in vacant structures, to reduce the expense and revenue gap on abatement cases by 50%, and then to overall improve the appearance of the community through management of uncultivated and overgrown vegetation, such as the average resident or visitor would score Topeka's property appearance at least a 7 on a scale of 10. And the police department would also rate then 80% or more of properties as in compliance with the crime prevention through environmental design principles within 5 years. And then at that same time, the trees, shrubs, and abatements by the city departments would be reduced by at least 50%.
Thank you for that. I mean, we have not really tried to hone in on the 4 major challenge goals because this performance data was still a work in progress. And so we're just now at the point where, and Nicole is going to keep leading the work on that for us to go through what she's done on these sheets, is to sort of lay out what the measurable points were listed in each of those. I'm not going to push it real hard. If we've got some time, if the IPMC is ready to start coming to this committee next month, we had thought it might be this month, and so I want to make sure we've always left time for that when you're ready to bring it. Are you thinking it'll be ready next month, or are we maybe talking August?
I think the plan was always August on the timeline. And yes, we're still on timeline. Nicole can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, at one point it was to get it kind of in mind by June so that it went through us and was ready to go to council by August. And so if it's going to come through us, we probably need at least 2 months on it. So.
We'll get it to you as soon as we get it done.
And I'm not trying to rush you. The issue would be on these challenges.
Right.
If it's ready, we'll focus on that next month. And my thought was that we would take 1 month and focus on the actual standards that we're using. And then within that, we were given a list from you of what ones you'd classified as priority health and safety. I'm not
Right.
naming it right. So that, because when you list them in the code, then there's, okay, what are we going to do about that? How are we, how much time are we going to give for things? How much pressure and all that sort of stuff. So I think we're going to need, once you've got stuff ready, a whole session just on that. And then because the whole fines and fees, was it going to be criminal or admin, and what's it going to look like, is probably worth a second focus session and then trying to pull it all together, just
Sure.
so there's time. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So if that's probably going to be enough for a PHS hour-and-a-half meeting,
Yeah.
each one of those. If you're not ready, we could spend a little more time on these challenges in July. If you're ready to go, Nicole and I can keep working on them, but we can make sure the meeting time, because we're going to want some input on, once the committee has seen that, there'll be some public
Sure.
thoughts, I'm sure. I know you met yesterday, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Did we? No, it was Monday that we met with.
Oh.
With legal? Yes, it was earlier in the week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, are you thinking that it'll be July or be August before you're ready to bring something forward?
I think I would rather promise you August and have you be happily surprised if it's July.
Okay, well, just know that to let everybody know, we would want to know in about 2 weeks whether you think you're ready for July so that we can set agendas and expectations.
Understood.
Okay. Anything else? The good of the order? We sort of covered next meeting just now, and it is already set for the third Wednesday in July.
Yeah, July 16th or something like that, July.
Yes, it's right here on the agenda, conveniently available.
Is that the right date?
Yes, you got it.
Man, I'm
All
gonna
right.
play the lotto.
Well, thank you, everyone. Councilman Kell and other committee members, anybody else who's watching, actually, if you've got questions or comments or suggestions on all of this, we wanted to, even with missing a couple committee members, go ahead and go through this and get this out so people could review it on video or in the minutes later, so that if there are some questions about the data, suggestions about data toward these master goals and so on, now that we've got a start, and again, kudos to Nicole and anybody who's helped you, we're finally at this now kind of pushing 3.5 year point, ready to start gathering this. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.